Hi, this is Miss Park. This video is going to be another example of word problems, but these ones have to do with money. So again, we're going to set up variables in a let statement. We're going to write an equation and solve it, and then answer the question. Okay, so have a look at this down here, money problems. Okay, Sam has $10.65 made up of dimes and quarters. So dimes are 10-cent coins, and quarters are 25-cent coins. Okay. And then they total $10.65. And they're telling us if there are 54 coins in all, how many are dimes and how many are quarters? Okay, so he's got a bag of money, bag of dimes and a bag of dimes and quarters, and altogether it adds up to $10.65. So really there's two pieces of information here again, right? There's always two pieces of information. The first one has to do with the value of the coins. So the value of the dimes plus the value of the quarters, that total value is 1065. Okay, so that has to be, value is how much they're worth. I have a handful of dimes, how much is that worth? Okay, but then the other piece of information has to do with how many you have. So there are 54 coins in all. So that means that the number of dimes plus the number of quarters is 54. So you see, that's kind of like, it's two separate equations that they're giving us. But the thing is, we only need one equation. So what we can do is we can use one of these equations as a let statement and use the other one as the equation. All right, and probably the easiest one to use for the let statement is the one that has to do with the number of dimes and quarters. This is very much like the age questions and like the number questions. If you know that two quantities add up to 54, and you give one of them a variable, then you can figure out how many quarters there are using that variable. So for example, if I knew there are 10 dimes, then how many quarters are there? Well, it would be 54 minus 10. If I knew there's 20 dimes, then it would be 54 minus 20 quarters. If I knew there were 51 dimes, then the number of quarters is 54 minus 51. So if I knew that there were d dimes, give it a variable, then the number of quarters would be 54 minus d. Okay, and that can be my let statement, and then we can set up the equation. I'll show you how to do that. All right, so to help us set all of this up is to, first of all, understand how do we figure out the value, this equation that's going to create the value. In the worksheet, they give you a little table to help you wrap your head around the difference between the number of coins and the value of the coins. So for example, they're giving you over here, if you have the number of dimes is 53, then the number of quarters must be 1, right? Because they have to add up to 54. What is the total value of your money? Well, you have 10 dimes, so that's 10 cents times 53. That's 530 cents. And the value quarters, well, you have 1 quarter, that's 25 cents. And add it up, you get 555, this is cents. Okay, which is the same thing as 555. Okay, now what if you have 52 dimes? Well, then the number of quarters, you know, is going to be 54 minus 52, and that's going to be 2. What's your value? So you'll have 10 cents, 52 of them, and you'll have 25 quarters, sorry, 2 quarters, and each one is 25, for a total of 570 cents. Okay, and so on. You can keep doing it. Do it with the 33 and so on. Now, what if you had D dimes? Well, then to get the number of quarters, you'll take your 54 and subtract D. All right. Now, what's the value of D dimes? So the value that you have in dimes is just 10 cents times the number of dimes, right? Just like up above, 10 cents times the number of dimes. And what's the value of quarters? Well, it's just 25 cents times the number of quarters. But the number of quarters is 54 minus D. Right? If you have D dimes, then the number of quarters is 54 minus D. The value of your dimes is 10 times the number of dimes. The value of your quarters is 25 times the number of quarters. Okay? What if instead of using a variable for the number of dimes, you decided to use a Q for the number of quarters? Okay, so if you have Q quarters, how many dimes do you have? Well, in total, you have 54 coins, so to figure out how many dimes is just 54 minus Q. Okay, what's the value of dimes you have? Well, it's 10 cents times the number of dimes. And what's the value of the quarters? Well, it's 25 cents times the number of quarters. Okay, and notice I don't have a number for any of these, it's just an algebraic expression, but my total value, I can figure it out like this. That's just what you get when you add up the value of your dimes, 54, and the value of your quarters. So you could do it like this, you can do it with D's, or you could do it with Q's. That's the total value. Okay, so if you like, pause the video here, see if you can write a let statement, because they're asking us, we're checking to see how many dimes and quarters does he have. So again, always look at the end of the question to see what are they asking for. They're asking for how many dimes and quarters does he have. We're only going to use one variable, D or Q. You can decide. So a let statement that introduces a variable, so either D or Q, but you have to have two parts to the let statement, because if you're going to use a D, you also have to have therefore some expression represents a number of quarters. Okay, if you're going to use Q, fine, but you also have to have the therefore that is the number of dimes. All right, then write the let statement and then write the equation that has to do with their value. So again, the let statement is going to have to do with the number of coins. The equation is going to have to do with their value. See if you can write both. Okay, so pause the video here and see if you can write both. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to try it. I'm going to go ahead and solve the problem here. So I'm going to start first with my let statement. So I'll use D. Let D represent the number of dimes. Please don't say let D represent dimes. I will complain, because dimes, what about the dimes? Is it their height? Is it their diameter? Is it their color? What about the dimes? It's the number of dimes, so please be very specific. Therefore, 54 minus D represents the number of quarters. Okay, that takes care of our let statement. Now I'm going to grab my other color for the equation. Okay, and the equation has to do with the value of the coins. Okay, so the equation is going to say that the value of the dimes plus the value of the quarters equals the total value. Okay, so if I'm using cents, I would go 10 times the value of dimes. So it's 10 cents for every dime, so it's 10 times D, plus 25 cents for every quarter, equals the total value. Now the total value they gave us is 1065. And if we're working in cents, it would look like this, right? We'd have to write the total value also in cents. Or you could work in dollars, so 0.10D plus 0.25 times 54 minus D equals 10.65. Okay, up to you. It's the same thing, but just be consistent. It's either cents or it's dollars. Okay, so let me work with the second equation. It's the same thing. So I'm just going to expand this out. Plus, now 54 times 0.25, I'll use my calculator. 54 times 0.25 is 13.5. So this is 13.5 minus 0.25D equals 10.65. Okay, collecting like terms, I have 0.10D minus 0.25D, that's negative 0.15D. Okay, equals 10.65 minus 13.5. And that gives me negative 0.15D equals, do a calculator, 10.65 minus 13.5, negative 2.85. I want to isolate D, so I'll divide both sides by negative 0.15. And I get D equals 19. Okay, now remember we have to answer the question. The question's asking how many of each coin. So I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to change the color. Okay, therefore, there are 19 dimes. Okay, how do I know how many quarters there are? Well, it's back to the let statement. The let statement says there's 54 minus D quarters. So 54 minus 19 is 35. And 35 quarters. Okay? All right. Keep practicing. Thank you. Keep watching.